click subscribe and hit that bell notification. Last week, we really covered David and Bathsheba. So David is the king of Israel. Bathsheba was a married woman, and they had an affair. The king kind of used his power, his sway, his influence to swoon her. She could have potentially been assaulted or raped against her will, or she could have gone along with it. We don't know. It's a little bit of inference, but you can see the dynamics there being a little sketchy. God did not like this. It says very clearly that he was displeased with David and Bathsheba and what had happened. And so he told him, though you deserve to die, you will not die. But there are still consequences for this sin. So though David was forgiven his sins, he still bears the consequences of those sins. A good example of this would be, I sinned and ended up breaking my arm in the process of sinning. God will forgive my sins. I still have a broken arm. We're going to start seeing these consequences play out. We're going to see that domino, right? There's a long line. God said that these are the consequences that are going to happen to you. The sword is going to afflict your family. Your wives will be taken to you and given to your neighbor, just as David took another man's wife. And then he lost his child. So this is the first domino to really fall to start a sequence of events. So the next 4 chapters, this is the beginning of a very long story. And we're going to start out with the main character. His name is Absalom. Absalom is a part of the story, but he doesn't seem to be the focus of the story right now. But we're going to find out that this is his backstory. He's kind of like a villain. This is his backstory on why he does what he does. What pushed him into this corner where he started to actually rebel against his father and try to take the throne. He's going to try to kill his dad in about 4 chapters. But right now, it's pretty innocent. And we're going to see how this scene unfolds. Okay, so this is Absalom's sister and David's son. These are all the children of David. David has a daughter named Tamar. David has a son named Absalom. And he also has a son named Amnon. These 3 are all family members with different moms. Absalom's sister is Tamar. They have the same mom, and David is their dad. And then Amnon is the first child of David. He's the firstborn, and he has a different mom. So they're half brother and sister, half siblings. David, their father, different moms. So we read in verse 1, now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her. And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin. And it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. And Jonadab was very crafty. And he said to him, O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me? Amnon said to him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Jonadab said to him, lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat it from her hand. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to him, Amnon said to the king, please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight, that I might eat from her hand. It seems somewhat innocuous in the beginning, right? But I want to notice here that Absalom is the focus. He is introduced first. We're going to focus on Amnon and Tamar, but Absalom really is the main character. Absalom is David's son, and Amnon is David's son. But who is Tamar? Tamar is Absalom's sister. That's what the narrator wants us to catch. We're not talking about David's daughter. We're talking about Absalom's sister, because Absalom's the main character. Absalom's sister is going to give us the background that we're looking for. When it says she's a virgin, what that means is that she's young, she's not married, she's chaste. She's never been with anybody. It's presumed that these kids They are children. Absalom, Amnon are either early 20s or late teens. So they're not all that grown up. And then Tamar is going to be younger than them. And it's rare to have a girl listed in genealogies. And Tamar is really, really important because when we learn about all of David's children, I'll cut to the quick, I think it comes up later, but David has, to this point in the text, 20 children. David has 20 kids and then some. It doesn't tell us the end some. It says that he has concubines and they have kids. That's all we know. But never discusses females or daughters. It's always men or males. And now Tamar is given in the genealogy. So she is also a very important kind of domino effect here in the sequence of David's life. So Amnon is tormented and he is sick. He is lusting. The Bible actually does say that it is love, but we know that word is used very generically and we would define it as lust. He has a overwhelming passion and a desire for his sister. Now, his half-sister, they don't live together. She lives somewhere else, and he sees her on occasion, and he becomes infatuated with her, and he just thinks that she will solve all of his problems. I like to call this, it's idolatry. There was a place in this young man's heart where God should dwell, and instead, it's this young woman. And so he's lusting after her, he's longing for her, and he's actually growing ill in his mind and in his heart and in his body. He's depressed, he's anxious because he's replaced God for this woman. And it gets even worse because it's his half-sister. He's struggling and having a hard time, but it says that it's impossible for him to do anything. Why would it be impossible for him to do anything? It's actually against the law. There's the Levitical law that says that relationship is inappropriate and deserving of death. It's not good. They're going to get into the situation. They're going to talk about some other things, but he is hopeless. He has no purpose in his life but to long for this person. Verse 3, Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. So who is Jonadab? It is Amnon's cousin. So their dads are brothers. So he's the nephew to the king. Now, Jonadab is like, hey man, what's going on? Oh, it gives us the description of this guy. He is very crafty. He's very wise. He's very cunning. So Jonadab is a slick mover. He knows what he's doing. And that's going to be very important later on. Verse 4, and he said to him, O son of the king, why are you so haggard or forlorn or falling apart morning after morning? Will you not tell me? He's coming up to him and he's like, come here, little bro. Come on, man. What's going on? Talk to me. Let me help you. And so he confesses, he says, I love my sister. Actually, I love my brother Absalom's sister. Right? You see that relationship again? Absalom's always in the middle when this conversation is taking place. So Jonadab says, no, I got this. What is Jonadab's solution here? Let's be cunning. Let's be shrewd. Let's be wise. Let's plot. We need to come up with a plan. Come on, man. It's not good for you to be experiencing these things. And instead of smacking him and being like, dude, you got to wake up. That is not okay. Instead of doing that, he's like, come here, buddy. I'll tell you what we need to do. I'll lead you down the path of folly. And we read that in Proverbs when we studied Proverbs. It says, wisdom cries out and says, come to me and I'll give you life. And folly cries out and says, I'll lead you down this path of destruction. So Jonadab is leading him down this path of foolishness. And he says, this is what you're going to do. Act sick. And when your father comes, who's his father? The king. When he comes, tell him you need your sister to take care of you. And because you're sick, I'm practically in your deathbed, he'll say yes. Now, when he addresses him, he says, oh, son of the king. It's like saying, Mr. Prince, how can you be struggling when you're the prince, when your dad is a king? How can you have these problems? We can solve this. Let's get your dad involved. Get a plan going. So he says in verse 5, lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat and prepare the food in my sight that I may see it and eat it from her hand. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight that I might eat from her hand. So this is a son's request and a father's request. Verse 7, then David sent home to Tamar, saying, go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him. So Amnon requests it, David complies, and he sends her over. And I know we see this, and we're thinking like, you're hearing the music of the foreboding, like dun, 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 dun. Like, this is all bad. Tamar shouldn't go, Tamar, don't go over there, man. They're gonna get you. But it seems innocent. David's just not thinking. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, you're sick. I'm gonna send your sister. She'll help you. Okay. I mean, like, I know you got servants, but maybe you need that extra love from the family. Verse 8, so Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, where he was lying down. And she took dough and kneaded it, made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and emptied it out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, send everyone out from me. So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food into the chamber that I might eat from your hand. And Tamar took the cakes she made and brought them into the chamber to Amnon, her brother. It's pretty clear what's about to happen. They were out in a common area. It's as if he was sick and he's like, oh, I'll come see you down in the kitchen. I'll come out to the living room where everybody's cooking. And then he's like, all right, everybody, you need to leave. She did something here very specific. And she took, verse 9, the pan and emptied it out before him, but he refused to eat. She's dealing with ashes. She's dealing with food and bread. And she's like, okay, I'm serving you at the kitchen table. And then he pulls a fast one and says, everybody get out. I need to be alone. So they leave. Verse 11, but when she brought them near to him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, come lie with me, my sister. So what is he asking here? Come to my bed and let's be intimate. Now, she has a choice here. What are those two choices? Yes or no? What do you think she's going to pick? So she says in verse 12, she answered to him, no, my brother, do not violate me. For such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous thing. As for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you would be as one of the outrageous fools in Israel. Now, therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. So she says, please don't do this. This is not right. This is not okay. You're going to violate me. You're going to humiliate me. Where can I go to escape my shame in Israel? This will haunt me for my entire life. And you, everyone will see you as a scoundrel, as a fool, as a evil person, as a terrible person. Here's a solution. Like, if you're so interested in this, then let's talk to the king and we'll get married. She's bartering with him. She's actually like, we can manage this situation. We don't have to go down this shameful path, because in marriage, it would be more condoned. If you do this thing before marriage, it will ruin us, both of us. Now, in this culture at this time, chastity is of utmost importance. Purity is number one. And they talk about this a lot. As we've gone through in other texts in the Bible, it talks about Jephthah. He was a judge. He made a vow that said that the first thing that came out of my door, I'll sacrifice to the Lord. And it happened to be his daughter, his only daughter. He loved her. And it says that she went and she mourned her virginity. She mourned that she would never be married. She mourned that she would never have children. And so in this culture, this is very highly esteemed, that women would get married and have kids. This would be the dream of their life. This would be the desire of everything that they lived for. And if he did this thing to her, she would lose all of that. Nobody would want to marry her. She would be considered, not necessarily considered like a prostitute, but impure. To be married off, it would be difficult. She's less valued. She's less cared for. People wouldn't esteem her as much. She is going to have a living death if this takes place. And she's explaining this to him, and he knows this. He is about to destroy her and himself. Verse 14, but he would not listen to her. That's folly right there. He would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and he lay with her, and he humiliated her. So he had strong muscles, but he had no character. He was a fool. He had no integrity, no morals. And this is the firstborn son of the king. He was going to be king one day, or he is going to be king one day. Verse 15, then Amnon hated her with very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, get up and get out. But she said to him, no, my brother, for this wrong in sending me away is greater than the wrong than the other that you did to me. So though she was assaulted, and that was severely hurtful and damaging, she's saying, we can still fix this. You just have to repent and do the right thing now. By sending me away now, you're making this worse. Because you've done this thing to me, we need to be married. Because you're going to be the only man that I'll ever be with. And we need to make this work. And he says, I hate you. Now, personal opinion, I think this is his own shame. He knows what he's done. And when he looks at her, he feels extreme guilt. And when he looked at her before, she was radiant, she was beautiful, she was pure, she was innocent, and now he ruined that in his own heart and his own mind. He broke her. And now when he looks at her, he sees the damage that he has caused. And he hates her for it. He takes it out on her because there is no repentance in his heart. He has fully given himself up to sin. He has devoted himself to the evil way, and he has abandoned himself to do what he should not be doing. And in doing that, he's walking down a path that continues to drag him down deeper and deeper. This is the hook of sin. Once it gets in your jaw, it will drag you down further and further and further. Every step of the way. First, it started with the longing. Then it went to a bad companionship, bad company, bad advice. Then the action. And he takes the action, doesn't fix it from there, and proceeds to make it worse. And he kicks her out. And she begs and pleads with him. Verse 16 through 19. But she said to him, he wouldn't listen to her. He called the young man who served him and said, put this woman out of my presence, and locked the door after her. Now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. It's like saying slam the door in her face. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she wore. And she laid her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. She's devastated. She is so hurt over what's taking place. And she's showing her pain to her society. This is what they did. They would tear their clothing and saying that my heart is ripped open, that I am torn in half. And then she grabs ashes and she puts them all over her head and her face. And she just walks around with her hand on her head, crying, just wailing the shame that she's going to have to live through, all of the things that are about to come upon her. And so she is announcing this to everybody. The whole household would know what just took place. This is not a secret thing. Now, I looked up the statistics. 53% of women experience some kind of sexual assault or attack. And 29% of men experience some kind of assault or attack. This is extremely prevalent in our culture. This is nothing new in our day, and it is nothing new in their day. God has very specific laws about what just took place. He says if you have somebody who rapes a woman, they are to be married. He is to pay the bride price. He is to do everything that is his responsibility to make sure that she is taken care of. And if he chooses not to, then she is allowed to go home to her parents, but he still has to pay the bride price. That's her insurance policy. That's her money. The bride price goes to her in the event of a death or divorce. So the person who is caught doing that either gets married or gets killed, because you don't put up with this in their society. And so that's where she says in verse 12, for such a thing is not done in Israel. This is inappropriate in our family. This is inappropriate in our society. This is inappropriate in our nation. And he still does it. And in our day and age, it is prevalent. And it's worse in other nations. It's far worse. Like Brazil is really bad. I've read some books and they're heart-wrenching. There's a good book. It's called The Suffering in the Heart of God. And this woman is a psychologist, and she travels around and deals with suffering in populations all over the world. She speaks. And so she gives her recounting of all the things that she goes through. It's very important to recognize that we need to protect our women and that we need to teach our men. Men need to live a self-controlled life, to be upright, to be honorable, to be protectors, and to not be predators. And women should be guarded, protected, and taken care of so that this never takes place. There's another aspect of this. A third of men have also experienced some kind of sexual assault. It's on both sides of the aisle, but it's far worse for women. But there are also women who need to learn self-control and discipline to live an honorable life and to not take advantage of people for selfish desires. Because Amnon is living for one purpose, his own desire. That's it. To fulfill his own selfish desires. And in doing so, he destroys their nation, he destroys their family, and he destroys his sister and his brothers. One selfish act. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? David, one selfish act leading to murder, killing Uriah. This is identical to what David did with Bathsheba. And this is just the beginning of the consequences. Like father, like son. Verse 20, and her brother Absalom said to her, has Amnon your brother been with you? Now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart. What is he saying? Just take a deep breath. Absalom talks her down. He says, hey, did your brother do this to you? Don't give it a second thought. Just put it out of your mind. Don't think about it. It'll be okay. Now, verse 20, Tamar lived a desolate life in her brother Absalom's house. What does that mean to live a desolate life? That means no husband, no children. She is, there's a term for this. There's a term for women who don't get married and never have kids. Spinster. So she stays at her brother's house. He has kids, they have family, and she's always kind of present. She's always with people, but she's never attached in her own life. Her life is living through her brother's family, right? So this is back to that. It's a living death. She's just constantly living in the consequences of this. Verse 21, when King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. And it says that David did not punish his son because he was the firstborn. What we know is that David does not punish his son. In the ESV, in the more modern texts, the Masoretic texts, there's different families of texts. Anyways, it says that David was very angry, but never punishes Amnon. And in the other text, it says that he didn't punish him because he's the firstborn. Now, the firstborn would be the rightful heir to the throne. He would be the prince of princes to take the throne. Now, I don't think that that's actually the case. I think that David is just a bad father. I think that he struggles to discipline and lead and guide his own children. This happens a lot. This is sad. This happens a lot with pastors. They focus so much on church, in providing for the church members, taking care of us, that they neglect their own families. And I think that that's David's problem, that he is so focused on being the king, focused on being a warrior, being his own man, living his own life. And he also has so many kids, he can't really be there for all of them. So he really is just a bad dad. And I think he just fails to do what is right. He fails to do what he should have been doing the whole time, to teach. He should have seen the warning signs. He should have seen Amnon's behavior, recognized it, and not sent Tamar in there. But he just gets really angry. Now, rightfully so. I think we can all relate to that. Now we get into verse 22. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad. Why? For Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. Absalom, again, our main character, what was his reaction? Hatred, so in his own heart. What does hatred lead to? Murder. Jesus says if you hate in your heart, you've already committed murder. When did Amnon assault his sister? When he lusted after her. Jesus says if you lust in your heart, you've already committed that sin. Amnon did these things already in his heart. That's how he could do them physically. He acted it out in his mind. He fantasized about it in his mind. He took a fantasy and turned it into a reality. And every serial killer will tell you that that's what they did. Every serial rapist will tell you that that's what they did. This is where sin begins, in the heart. And God says, I see your heart and I consider it as completed actions. When you hate, it's as if you've murdered. Absalom hates Amnon, but he doesn't let anybody know about it. He doesn't tell Amnon, you suck, I don't like you, you're stupid, get out of my face. He just ignores him. His family is normal. I mean, this is just the day in the life in polygamy. We saw this with Jacob and Esau, their families. Actually, Jacob and Esau, their families, they were polygamous. But anyways, going on, verse 23. After 2 years, Absalom had sheep shears at Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim. And Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the king and said, behold, your servant has sheep shears. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant. But the king said to Absalom, no, my son, let us not all go, lest we be burdensome to you. He pressed him, but he would not go, but he gave him his blessing. So 2 years later, it's a long time. Not much has happened. Life moved on. And then Absalom goes and talks to the king, and he's asking the king to do something. What is he asking the king to do? Let's get together. Let's have a barbecue. Let's get a family reunion. But why? What would be the occasion? To shear the sheep. Do you know that it's unhealthy for them to have that much wool? So what do? Shear it off. Okay? So this is the occasion once a year or twice a year where they would go sheep shearing. It's very much like harvesting the vegetables or harvesting the field. It is a societal event. It is the thing to do. They all get together. They work really, really hard. When you work hard, you play hard. So they celebrate. You maybe, kill a couple sheep, eat, feast. This is a fall festival. It's kind of what we call it. And so he's asking his dad, he's saying, Dad, I want to have a fall festival. All my sheep shearers are out here. We're going to be partying. I want all my brothers to come. And you, the king, and all your people, we want you to come. And he's like, dude, you're talking like 500 people. He's like, and that's where the king's like, we're not going to do that, son. We're not going to put that pressure on you to do that. And so he's going to just push and push and push. And he's going to be like, okay, you can go have a fall festival. And then he's going to say, verse 26, then Absalom said, if not, please let my brother Amnon go with us. And the king said to him, why should he go with you? But Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. Now, I think the argument went something like this. Give me Amnon. Why do you want Amnon? I mean, give me everybody, right? He was like bullseye to shotgun. Absalom's actually very smart. He's very cunning. He's very crafty. We're going to see this later on. This guy has some swag. He knows how to get his way. So he pushes and he pushes and he pushes until all the king's sons go. Not just Amnon, but all the king's sons. Verse 28. Then Absalom commanded his servants, mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not fear, I have commanded you. Have I not commanded you? Be courageous and be honorable sons or sons of honor. So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose and each mounted his mule and ran away. They fled. It's a conspiracy. This is 2 years in the making. And he's like, hey, everybody, let's have a party. And nobody's thinking about it. Everybody's guards are down. Absalom tells his servants, he says, hey, when you see him smiling and laughing and having a good old time, I'm going to give you the word. And I'm going to say, strike him dead. And you go kill him. I want you to walk right behind him and just slit his throat. There is zero mercy here. Remember when he told his sister, don't even question it. Don't even think about it. What was he thinking in the back of his mind? This is not going to happen again. This is not going to happen again. He did the exact same thing that Amnon did. He had sin get rooted in his heart. He fantasized about it. He planned it. And he executed the plan. Now, there's over 19 other kids there, actually 18 other kids there, who are all royalty. Why would they run? Why would they flee? To not get murdered. Because there's the king, and then there is the heir to the throne, and then the heir after that, and then the heir after that, and the heir after that. If there's 19 kids, that means that there's 19 potential heirs to the throne. And if you kill 17, you might just skip the list. Yes, but there is always suspicion. These are not of one woman. This is 6 different women, multiple concubines. Like, they're not a close family. Polygamy is destructive by nature, okay? So, and this has also happened before. There was one son who hired a bunch of mercenaries and killed 70 of his brothers. It was Gideon's sons. Gideon died, and his son Ahimelech killed all of the children so that he could become the judge or the ruler of Israel. So they all flee for their lives. They think it's a conspiracy for the throne. Absalom just wants justice, but they don't know that. Verse 30, while they were on the way, news came to David. Now, this is 15 miles away from Jerusalem. So this happened 15 miles away. You jump on your donkey, and I don't know how fast a donkey can go. A donkey could probably go 12 to 15 miles an hour. It took at minimum an hour to get to David. News gets back and it says Absalom has struck down all the king's sons and not one of them is left. Then the king arose, he tore his garments and he lay on the earth. And all his servants were standing by, they tore their garments. What is he thinking? What is in David's mind right now? Devastation. I'd imagine he's thinking God's punishment is severe. Like, I knew this was coming. God told me this was coming. And this is years after Bathsheba. And now he gets a report. All of his kids are killed. Now, he trusted Amnon. Then he trusted Absalom. He trusted Amnon and he hurt his daughter. He trusted Absalom and he killed all of his sons. You can imagine David's not so trustworthy anymore, or he's not trusting anymore. But he's just forlorn. He's crushed. All of his kids are gone. Absolute punishment. He's just losing everything that matters to him. Then in verse 32, but Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother, said, who's this guy? Have we seen him before? Where'd we see him? Oh, he was the friend to Amnon who told him you should act sick and then your sister will come and you can take advantage of her. That guy? Wait, he's standing there with the king, right? News comes to the king riding on a donkey and the king thinks that everybody's dead. And this dude's just standing there. Listen to what he says. Let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead. For by the command of Absalom, this has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar. What is he saying? He knows. How would he know the reason why Amnon's dead? He was a part of the conspiracy to some level. And he says this, no, not all the sons, just one. And it was Absalom. Absalom did it because he assaulted his sister. Now the guy who plotted the plan is now ratting out the plan. And he has the king's ear. Now this is the nephew of the king. Talk about some political swag. So he took one of the princes, actually he took the prince of princes, and he whispered in his ear. And then he was talking with Absalom. And he said that Absalom from day one was talking about murdering Amnon. For 2 years, I listened to him talk about wanting to do this thing. He was there every step of the way. That is really bad company. You got to be careful with your friends and the people who are whispering in your ear. Verse 34, but Absalom fled, and the young man who kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, many people were coming from the road behind him by the side of the mountain. And Jonadab said to the king, behold, the king's sons have come. As your servant said, so it has come about. Oh, hey, look, all your kids are here. Just like I said, they're perfectly fine, O king. Verse 36, and as soon as he had finished speaking, behold, the king's son came. They lifted up their voice and they wept. And the king also and all his servants, and they wept very bitterly. So apparently Amnon was relatively cared about in this family. They suffered as a family. Now what's interesting is when families fracture, what can bring them back together, a death in the family or some other chaotic event. It's strange how those things bring unity. When you otherwise kind of ignore your family, when there's a devastating news or a devastating event that takes place in the family, it unites. And so they come together and they just weep and they wail. It's just, oh my goodness, we've lost two brothers. We lost Amnon, and Absalom's gone. He left and he's gone. Verse 37, but Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. And David mourned for his son day after day. Why did he go to Geshur? Why would Absalom go there and live with that king? What's the punishment for murder? Death. Eye for an eye. Take a life, you lose your life. Legally, yes. Now, could he be pardoned by the king? Yeah, it's the king. He can do whatever he wants. But why Geshur? So Absalom's mom is actually a princess. David married a princess from the king of Geshur. So he went home to his mother's family. Verse 38, so Absalom fled and went to Geshur, and he was there for 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. I think David didn't know what to do with Amnon. He really failed in his capacity as a father, as a leader, as the king, to manage the heir to the throne. And I think he felt relieved when Amnon was killed. He's like, okay, at least we can put this in the past. We can just get over it. But now Absalom's gone. And David really, really loves Absalom. We're going to find out as we read this, David will do anything for that child except discipline and correct him. So he has a love that allows his children to do whatever they want, but not do what they need. So their relationship is going to be fractured. Absalom's going to be there for 3 years. So since the date of the rape, how long is it going to be until Absalom sees his father? 5 years. So we think of like our suffering in our lives as being like, oh man, I suffered with this thing for a year, or this thing for 6 months, or this thing for, a whatever period of time. They have the unity of the family, and then they have kind of that fractured member. David's going to really not ever really going to get along with Absalom again, ever. And then we're going to find that fracture is going to start dividing the nation. It's going to really start pulling Israel apart. There's going to be a lot of friction and difficulty inside of Israel. David's sin was so isolated, and now it is just rippling out and affecting even his country. It's destroying his family, and is now going to destroy the lineage of the Lord. God's people, God's heritage is going to be affected by it. We can see the same thing when you see a pastor or an influential person in the church. When they have little sin in their life, it's actually big sin, but it seems little, like insignificant. It's their locale. and then it blows up and it just starts to rip apart people's lives and rip apart the church, and it affects God's people. That's why we don't stand for sin. We don't want sin in our lives. We don't want it in our Bible study. We don't want it in our church. We don't want it in our nation, in our families, in our state. Every step of the way, we want to eradicate sin. Now, we don't do it by force, but we do it by teaching people the gospel, instructing them in the forgiveness of sins and the deliverance from sin. Jesus died not just to save us from the penalty of sin, but from the power of sin, so that we are not slaves to sin anymore. He actually makes us slaves of righteousness, to do what is right, to do what is good and pure and holy. Imagine if Amnon had been confronted, if he had been talked to, if he had been guided and directed and told, don't go down that path, stick to the narrow way. It would have saved the country. He's the domino that starts all of this. Okay, what is your application? So David's failure as a father, calling out sin even if it's in hypocrisy. David's sin is identical to both of his sons. Rape and then murder. That's both his sons. He was incapable of calling out the sin because I think he felt the shame and the hypocrisy in it himself. Like, how can I tell you what you did is wrong when I did the very same thing like last year or 2 years ago? But here's the thing, it doesn't matter. You just have to do it. You might have been a huge drug addict. Go ahead, call out drug addicts. You might have issues with pornography. Go ahead, call it out for what it is. It's bad, it's wrong. It doesn't matter if you've been there, if you've been the hypocrite and you played the hypocrite. You gotta call sin, sin. Even if you're guilty of it. They might not respect it, but that doesn't change the fact that you still have to say it. And that's hard. That's really hard because you have to acknowledge to yourself that I'm also the problem. David can do that. He can say, I'm the problem, but to his children, I don't know that relationship. I'm not a dad. I don't have children, but I can imagine that relationship is really difficult. It's really hard to say, hey, I'm sorry that I did exactly what you're doing, and I really, really, really want to try to rescue you from it. And I don't think you're going to listen to me, and I'm ashamed of it. That's got to be difficult, but I think it's still necessary for the parent to step up to the plate and just do what they need to do. Life is full of difficult decisions. You just gotta you gotta have those conversations. It's in all of our wheelhouse. You're all gonna have conversations you don't want to have. At work, at home, with your parents, with your kids, with your coworkers, with your boss. Like your boss is treating you inappropriately. Yeah, awkward conversation. I don't think you're addressing me properly. That's hard. But you know what you gotta do? Step up to the plate. That's what it means to be an adult. You have to say what needs to be said. You can't stay silent. And David failed as a father. And I think we all failed in some degree at doing this because when that opportunity to share the gospel arises, it's like, what are they gonna think? Or I don't wanna sound stupid, or I don't wanna be that guy, or whatever it is. Speaking when the time is pressed upon you is the requirement. Whatever it is. Sin, righteousness, the gospel, salvation, forgiveness. It's a part of life. Abimelech, the son of Jerubbesheth, I brought this up earlier. This story is identical. Abimelech killed 69 of his brothers, 68 of his brothers. One escaped. And David went through the same thing. What's interesting is that during the saga of David and Bathsheba, one of David's men bring this up to him, and he brings up this story. And the moral of the story is what you reap is what you sow. What you plant is what you will harvest. Forgiveness or not, God on your side or not, what you sow is what you will reap. If you plant an apple seed, you will get an apple tree. It's a fact. It's a spiritual reality. So be careful what you sow. David, the rest of his life, he's going to be reaping from this tree of sorrow. And here, a really good example of polygamy and why the Bible doesn't condone it. Why the Bible shows us that having multiple spouses is devastating. Every single family in the Bible who has multiple spouses falls apart. And somebody gets murdered. It's just a fact. And then being careful who speaks into your life. In Proverbs 27:6, it says, the wounds of a friend are healing, but the kisses of an enemy are profuse. A friend who is willing to punch you in the stomach is better than an enemy who will give you a hug. That's what David needed to be to his kids. He needed to be a good father and discipline them. And we need that from each other. Accountability. I was having a conversation with a young man and he was like, oh, I watch pornography here and there. And I'm like, hey man, that's poison. Like, you don't want any of that. You know it's sinful, right? And he kind of looks at me. I'm like, no. Like, I need you to hear that watching pornography is sinful. And this was not a fun conversation. I'm like, I'm pretty sure this guy's never gonna come talk to me again. But we have a cordial enough conversation or a relationship, but it's very important to speak up and say, hey, I just need to be clear. That's wrong. At some point, did somebody ever look at Amnon and be like, hey, you do realize that's a no-no. Don't do that. Next week, we're gonna be talking about 2 Samuel 14, fallen family to a fallen nation. Absalom is going to be the focal point for the next couple chapters. He is going to be the gift that keeps on giving.